Hello there and welcome back to our ASP.NET Core for Absolute Beginners training course here on Code Wrinkles, and thank you very much for joining. How's your Monday? How has your week started? Is everything okay? At least for myself, I had a great Monday because here in Romania we had the bank holiday today. So yeah, actually I didn't have to work, so I had a little bit of more time to concentrate on doing stuff for this Code Wrinkles channel. And yeah, it was quite a chill day, I would say, but very, or cold at least, for my standards. So I basically stayed inside the entire day. But the good thing is this week will be only a 4 days working week, so that's actually great. Okay, so before we get started, there are some few things that I would like to chat with you about, and I would be glad if you can maybe jump into the conversation and maybe ask your questions or clarifications or anything others that you might feel the need to talk about. So the first thing is that the last time out we actually got or hit a roadblock, not actually from an ASP.NET Core perspective, but from the point of view of the business logic of our application, like how do we actually want to make sure when we create a reservation that that specific room is not already booked for that exact period. And well, I didn't really prepare for that, so kind of like this remained unresolved. So today we will resolve this. And of course, in the meantime, I have given a thought about that, and actually the idea is that when we actually want to make sure that the room is not already booked for a certain period. Now the thing is that we can't really actually do this by simply checking this busy from or busy to, because there are a lot of scenarios where there might be different reservations for a certain room. And even if, I don't know, the room is maybe available during a certain period, but right now somebody stays in the room, then we will have this busy from and busy to. So we can't really just use these properties to actually define if a certain room is available or not. So what we'll do instead, if we'll implement this by actually checking all the reservations for that specific combination of hotel ID and room ID, and we'll do actually the check on the dates directly there. And actually, when I was thinking about this, I guess that's also very nice, because we get to actually look into other, I would say, Entity Framework Core methods that we have in Entity Framework Core besides this first or default async or other similar stuff. So this is the first thing that we will do today. And then the second thing is probably we'll also create some methods in our reservations controller to get all the reservations, to get a reservation, I don't know, maybe by hotel ID and room ID. That would be actually useful to get a certain reservation only. And then I guess we'll also implement the idea of canceling a certain reservation, which is also something that would be important. And last but not least, if we still have time, and I guess we will have enough time, we will also look into this concept of model validation, and we'll look exactly on how can we validate in our API that actually the data that clients send us is actually in a correct format, and it is what we expect it to be. Like for instance, for a reservation, we want to make sure that there is really a check-in date and a checkout date, and if there isn't, the request shouldn't even be processed by our service. We should directly return a bad request because we don't have all the information that we would need for that specific reservation. So we will look into that model validation stuff. And then the last point that I wanted to discuss with you is actually giving a thought about what we have achieved so far. I have actually come to the conclusion that that's actually pretty much it for this course at a beginner's level, because we covered really everything that you need to know about ASP.NET Core APIs. And one thing that I can assure you, at least in the company for which I work, where I do a lot of interviews, if you know all the stuff that we have discussed during this training, then your position as a junior developer would be almost guaranteed. So if you really understand all the concepts that we have discussed so far in this training, and can create your own APIs, just like we have done with this one, then I guess you are more or less fit actually for really getting a job. Of course, there is probably some other or there is also a certain theoretical background regarding object-oriented programming and solid principles and the C# syntaxes and how C# works that you should know. But from the perspective of ASP.NET Core, if you understand and know what we have discussed here, that would be totally enough to actually get you going. So next Monday, and here please be a little bit careful, because here there is something that I will also ask for you. So for the next Monday, I have actually thought about doing a summary, kind of like a recap, in which we'll go through the entire application. We'll do a recap on the entire project structure. Why do we have all these projects? What belongs in each of the projects? And then what each part of our ASP.NET Core API is responsible for. So we will do a recap on that. But then I would like to have a Q&A session, and that's actually your homework for next time out. Please make sure that you write your questions down in advance or prepare your questions, so that when we go over to the Q&A part of next Monday's lesson, you should also ask your questions. That would be very, very important, because as I said, my main goal here is, while doing like a course using this live stream thingy, is that we can actually communicate directly, even if not in person, but we can communicate directly. And as it will be the last lesson of this specific course, it is very important for me to know that all unclarities that you might have are actually discussed and clarified. So once again, for next Monday, just please feel free to prepare your questions, because next Monday we'll have a dedicated Q&A session. So just review the entire course that we have done, review your applications that you might have written following this course, and come up with the questions that you have, because I really want to take some time to clarify them. Okay, so that's on you for next Monday actually. Okay, cool. So let's get started then for today. And as I said, the first thing that I would like to look into is actually to refactor a little bit this service here, to actually calculate if a certain room is busy in a totally different way than what we are doing now. And as said, actually these properties busy from and busy to on a room are actually not relevant at all. So for right now, we will simply not use them. And we will use actually all the reservations for a certain hotel and a room, and we'll check in those reservations if the room is busy or not. So that's actually the main thing that we actually want to do right now. So what we will do in this case is something similar to what we have already done here, but it will be just a little bit different. So the thing is that we will do here, and let's maybe start by removing things. So first of all, we actually don't need to set these properties anymore, because as said, they are not relevant at all, because no matter if you right now, if a reservation arrives and you put a date to and from and a date to the room, then if a second reservation arrives for the same room but for a different period, then you would have to overwrite that, and it will be a total mess. So it's really not working like that. So instead, we have removed that. Let's also remove this part here, and we'll keep here this step 4, because here is like we want to make sure that this reservation is even possible. So here what we'll have is, still we'll have this boolean, which we call is busy, and we'll set this by default to false. And then actually we will not set it to false. We'll do directly something very, very nice here. Okay, right on. I think you also think about course policy token authorization tutorial. well, a token and course and things like that, that's really not something for an ASP.NET Core beginners. That's something that I would include in an ASP.NET Core for intermediates course. So that's really not something that I would include there, because you have to go into the entire theory, what actually course is, what actually authentication is, what's OpenID Connect, what is OAuth 2.0. So these are things that are, in my opinion, far beyond what it should be covered in a beginner's course. Okay, so what we'll do here and here, that would be actually very, very interesting. And we'll use an await because we will use here the context directly. And on the data context or on the DB context, we have already a property reservations, which we can use to actually query our reservations table. And that's actually what we will use today. Now, until now, we have mostly used in Entity Framework Core things like first or default async. Or we have used other actually like to-list async to get a list of certain resources. But Entity Framework Core, as it's actually based on link queue or link, depending how you might want to pronounce that, has a lot of different extensions methods that allows us to work with this type of collections, or remote collections, I will call them, because they actually stay in a database in different other ways. And one way to actually work with that is a method that is called any. And of course, in Entity Framework Core, we have the async version of this method, which is AnyAsync. Now, the idea of, and we have to add the using, of course. Now, the idea for this AnyAsync is, if we hover the mouse here, we see that it actually returns a task of bool. So it means that what we can do here is we can specify a condition here, similar to what we do when we actually run that first or default async method, where we say that we want the first element or the default, but then we also specify a condition using a lambda expression. So that's similar here. That concept actually works exactly the same. Now the only difference is that instead of returning us a resource, it returns us true if it did find in a database at least one entry that corresponds to our criteria that we specify, and it returns false if it doesn't find in the database any record that meets the criteria that we actually specify here in a lambda expression. And let's start with this lambda expression. We will use the letter R for reservation. And then actually we will have to write some longer things here, and that's why I will go actually here on a new line. And I will also use parentheses because we will have a combination of two different expressions that we want to evaluate first of all separately, but then we want to evaluate them together. Hi Adelina, and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining also for today's session. Okay, so we have this parentheses, and what we want to check here is first of all that the check-in date for the reservation that arrives to this service from the controller, so therefore it arrives from the client that actually wants to make a reservation. So first of all, we want to make sure that this check-in date is greater or equal to r.check-in date. So if we find actually check, so if we find, for instance, any already existing reservation that has a check-in date that actually is less than or equal to this one of the reservation that we want to actually receive right now. So this is what we actually want to check here first. And then we also want to make sure that the checkout date here for the reservation, let me go, or sorry, still the check-in date on the reservation dot check-in date, and this should be less than or equal to r dot checkout date. So if this is actually true, what's wrong here? guess we have the wrong property, or yeah, because it's like this. Okay, so what we actually check here, that if the check-in date of the reservation that we just actually received is actually between this date and this date, then in this case it means that the room should be busy. But then we have to also evaluate the checkout date of the incoming reservation. So this is actually what we will try to do now, and we'll actually use a similar structure to what we already had here. Now the only difference is, however, that what we will do is we will actually add an end, and here we'll add another parenthesis, because here is the part of the expression where we evaluate the checkout date. So if reservation, but I guess we have something that's not totally okay here. So let me just check again. So we run this example here. So if the reservation checking date is greater than or equals than the checking date of the reservation in the database, or if the reservation checking date is less than or equal to the reservation, but here it would be checkout date. Okay, so this is the first part of our condition, and then we actually have to jump to the second part of our condition, and that second part would be and reservation dot checkout date, and it's actually similar here to what we had before. So if the checkout date is greater than or equal than the check-in date of an existing reservation, and reservation dot checkout date, it's this one, should be once again less than or equal to the checkout of an existing reservation. Okay, now if this entire expression evaluates to true, it means that the room is busy, because the provided check-in and checkout is either actually in this interval or it is in this interval, and that will actually also work. And now that we have this is busy, after we await that, we can simply say if is busy. So if it is true, if the room is busy and cannot be reserved, we said that we will just return null in this case. So then the controller would know then the reservation is actually not possible. Then we also check if the room needs repair, then we also return null because the reservation is not possible. And otherwise we can actually persist everything in a database and everything should be fine. Now we just have to rename this step to be a step 5 here. Now let's maybe also remove this thing here because we don't need it anymore. So remember that we did need that part because initially what we had here in our method, we just got here, for instance, like the hotel ID, room ID, check-in, checkout date. And instead of that, we have said, okay, we want to make our method to be more readable, and we have refactored it to actually receive a reservation object that would contain, of course, all the information that might be needed. So in that case, we don't really need to create that object ourselves. So we can even recount the steps here. So that would be first, that would be second, that would be third, and that would be fourth. And now, to be very precise, there is one other thing that I would like to change here. And for instance, if the hotel is null or if the room is null, then we also want to return null, because in that case also the reservation should not be possible, because the ID that was provided for the hotel or for the room does not exist. So we are not able to actually perform a reservation in that case. So what we'll do here is, okay, we'll say if hotel equals null or room equals null, then we will just return null, because it means we can perform a reservation if we don't find a hotel or the room in the database. So yeah, that's I guess, or that should be actually fairly straightforward. And then we check this is busy and everything should be okay. So now let's set a breakpoint here and let's try this out actually. So we'll open here, or Swagger will open just in a second. Let me just bring it here on the other screen. And yeah, right now, just in a few seconds, we should be able to see that. Now, for instance, let me try a reservation here. And for instance, I want a reservation for the room ID 1, for the hotel ID 1. And I want this reservation from, I don't know, 25th of January to 31st. And I know, because I already created several different reservations, that for these dates, this room is certainly not available on certain dates here. I guess there are 2 days in between where the room would be available, but for the other days it will not be available. And yeah, let's try to actually run this, and let's see if that actually works. So we have this hotel. Let's try to get it. The first time it actually goes a little bit slower, but it should still work. Okay, so we have a hotel, so that part is okay. Then we get a room, and we also get a room, so also this part is okay. So this if will actually not return anything, because this condition will not be true, because both of them are not null. And then this is this part where we actually check if we have, or if we can make this reservation here. And here we see that is busy is false. And that's actually not sure that it's what I would have expected. So yeah, let me maybe go here in this View SQL Server Object Explorer. Let's do a refresh here. And let's go on View Data. Okay, so we have a lot of reservations here. Let's take a look here at the check-in and the checkout. So we have a reservation here that starts in... actually, we have a reservation for the exact same period. We have a reservation for the exact same period. So probably the problem here is that we had this greater than or equal, and it actually... yeah, but no, theoretically that should have worked. So we have created a reservation that actually meets this exact criteria. So I am not sure actually why we were able to do that. And we also did, we did get an exception here. What did we get here? Let us check. Maybe I did forget to add something. I don't know. Let's see, what do we get? A possible, okay. So the reservation was created, but we did get another error. Let us check first with the database. Once again, view data, and see if the reservation was created. And indeed it was created, and we see that we have right now 2 reservations then for the same period, which is okay. It is of course not what we would have expected, but we'll change that soon. Okay, and then we had an error, and it was saying something that well, we had some problems while we tried to actually serialize to JSON. So while we actually tried to create a JSON response for that. Now the problem there is, and I'm not sure, I don't remember if we did discuss that so far, but I guess we have discussed this maybe when we did talk about DTOs. And let me show you what actually the problem is here. And for that I will go to the controllers. And what we do here, we see that, okay, we get a reservation back. And in this case, okay, our logic for checking if the reservation is valid was not working, okay, but the reservation was still created in the database, so it was still returned as a result. So, okay, we didn't just try to actually parse that result. or send that result actually as a response. Now this result, if we take a look here, we hover our mouse over it, is of type reservation, okay? And let's see. So in this reservation, we see that we have a property, for instance, that is actually called room, and also a property that is called hotel, okay? But then if we go to the hotel will have also a list of room. And the room will have a hotel. And the hotel will have a list of room. And you see, it's kind of like an infinite loop here. And of course, while ASP.NET Core tries to actually serialize this to JSON, it goes to all properties and it tries to actually write those properties. But when it tries to actually write this hotel property, it actually goes through this kind of like infinite loop. Because when it tries to actually, I don't know, maybe it arrives at the hotel and it tries to render this list of room. Now it arrives at this room, it tries to render this hotel as JSON. Then it arrives at the hotel, it tries once again to create this list of room, and so on and so forth. And this goes actually on forever. And of course, ASP.NET Core does not know exactly, okay, what should we do this? Because, well, we can try to do this kind of like JSON for as long as the application runs. So we will actually never give a response, but that is actually not supported by ASP.NET Core. And of course, you might run into this problem very, very often when you have properties actually that kind of reference other properties and build like a circle of those references. So that will happen in the meantime. Let's even just delete that. So that will happen always when you have this kind of scenario. So this is one of the reasons why we actually need to use data transfer objects, so DTOs. So what we actually need to do here in this case is, let me go back to where were we first. Let me get back to this reservation. And for now, let me just copy over all these properties, because what we will do right now is we will create a DTO for that. And for the put and post, when we want to create a reservation, we already have a DTO. Now we have to also create a DTO for the get. So let's create here a new class, and we'll call this reservation get DTO. And here for now, we'll just paste all the properties that we have copied over. And let's actually take a look at what we don't need here. So we actually don't need this room ID. And instead of rendering the room, we want to render a room get DTO. And for the hotel, it's actually the same. We don't want to render the ID, but we want to render this hotel get DTO, for which we already have created DTOs, and the mapping will already work for those two. So that will be no problem. So we have here a date time for the check-in date, and we have here a date time for the checkout date, and a string customer. So I guess that should be okay right now. Now, as we have created a DTO, what would be the next step that we need to do? We need to also create a mapping profile to be able to actually map from a reservation to a reservation get DTO. So in that case, we go to this automapper folder, and here we already have this reservation mapping profiles, and here we already have the map for the put and post DTO. So we have to add also a map for the get. And what we want to do here is the source will be a reservation, because that's what we will actually receive and work with. And when we render this to back to the client as a response to the request that just came in, we want to actually have their reservation get DTO. Okay, and that will actually do it. Now, the only other thing is that in the controller, and let me check back in this controller, what we need to do here, we need to add another line here, var map equals mapper.map, and we want to map to a reservation get DTO, and the source for this should be the result. And right now, when we return OK, everything should actually work just fine. Now, let us maybe just run the application once again and try to create a new reservation and make sure that it's possible to create it. We have seen already that the creation of that reservation was actually not a problem, but that logic for checking the availability. So let's try it once again. One. Let's make it to be from, I don't know, 27. I want it to be till 28, and let's put also here a customer. Okay, so let's close this for now. So we are back here. We get the hotel, I guess. Cool. We have the hotel. That's cool. We are okay with that. Then we get the room. We are also cool with that. But then we then try to is busy, and let's check this out. And this time you see that is busy is true, because the interval for that exact time where we actually want to make that reservation, well, it is busy. The room is not available. And then we just return null. So everything is okay here. In this case, we just continue. Okay, so we return here a bad request that cannot create reservation. It's basically what we do in our controller. Now let's try to just create a new reservation that will work. So let's have here from February 10 to February, I don't know, maybe somebody wants to spend a Valentine's Day in a certain hotel here, and I don't know, let's have 16. Okay, and let's execute. And right now, once again, we get the hotel. The hotel is not null. We get a room. Room is also not null. So we don't return here. Then is busy. It returns false because there is no reservation for that specific period. So we then just go further, and yeah, we'll save changes to the database, and then we will return the reservation. So if we just click on continue, I guess we still had an error, but okay, a cycle was detected. Okay, so we got the exact same error back. Okay. It's the exact same error, but I'm not sure exactly why we actually did get that. So let me just put a breakpoint, because we have, did we forget to do the mapping? No, we did the mapping. Let's look in the AutoMapper profile. So for the hotel, we already have a hotel get DTO. So theoretically, it should know how to actually map from hotel to hotel get DTO. Then for the room, it's exactly the same. We have from room to a room get DTO. So it should also know how to map that. So let's take a look again here. Okay. So we have created the map, and I guess in the controller, I guess the problem is in the controller. I guess I was not careful enough. Indeed, because we have done the mapping, but we still return the result. So yeah, of course. So of course we have to return what we just mapped, not the result. Cool. Okay, happens. Okay, so let's try to run again and create a new reservation. Now, even if we did get an error, the reservation was still performed correctly. So we can actually go in further and check once again, or try once again to create a new reservation. I'll use once again some periods that should be fine here. So it would be, I don't know, 1. This would be 1. Let's make this be February, and it should be, I don't know, starting from 20. To once again February, and let's say till 22. And yeah, let's also give something here for the customer, and that's okay. Cool. So now we wait a little bit, and we don't have any breakpoint, and right now we see that we get the correct result back. So that reservation was added. We see that the reservation was made. We see the ID of the reservation, which might be important for the other functionality that we want to introduce. We see the room for which we actually did the reservation, we see the hotel at which we did the reservation, the check-in date, the checkout date, and the customer. So that's pretty much it. Now, of course, as for the logic itself, like if a reservation is valid or not, trust me, that's a really complicated thing, because we will have to also evaluate that the check-in or checkout are not for dates in the past, or that the checkout date is not less than or equal with the check-in date. So there are a lot of other things that might need to be actually validated, and actually that would be a pretty much or a fairly complex validation that would probably get its own classes for each part of the validation itself. So it would be certainly designed a little bit differently than just having an if or checking in the database for some conditions. But once again, we just want to have this bare minimum running, because I just wanted to showcase this concept of why we actually need services here. Because we have talked about repositories, and we saw that actually repositories can be actually used very, very simply by, well, actually just getting a resource or a list of resources, creating a new resource, updating it, or deleting it. So for that purpose, a repository is very much okay. And everything that's actually related to data retrieval or data updating processes can actually be placed in a repository. But here in the case of our reservation, and that's the point for the need of the concept of services, is that we actually don't just simply perform a CRUD operation, or we don't just simply perform a certain operation on data. We actually need to perform several different operations with the database, because here we have different steps, and that's why I also wanted to actually have this actually describe the steps. In step 1 we do this, in step 2 we do this. So here we get one resource, here we get another resource. Here once again we interact with a third resource already. So already we can see that you can't really have this in a repository. So a service is kind of like an orchestrator that, yeah, of course it needs to retrieve some data from the database, and probably at the very end also persist some data in the database. But until then, or between these 2 points, there is a lot of logic that's actually happening. And that's why what we actually place in a service class. And remember, the service is actually added to ASP.NET Core in the startup file, and we have added this service as scoped. And of course, we have also published an interface for this service. And to actually get a little bit accustomed actually with this idea of a service, I would like actually to continue right now to add some further functionality to this service. So first of all, what I would actually need to do or like to do is I would like to get a list of reservations. Because right now in the Swagger documentation, we can't really actually see the reservations that we have in the database. We had to check the database directly for that. So even if I see that we lost some of the viewers, I'm not sure why, maybe it was too boring till now, but for those of you that are still there, this question goes for you. Or it's actually not a question, but I want it to be kind of like a discussion. So here's the requirements. Let's say somebody from the business comes to you and says, okay, we have this API, that's great. Hey, we want a new feature. We want to be able to actually get a list of reservations, and also maybe to just be able to get one reservation by ID. And you are the developer that has actually to implement this new requirement. So based on the infrastructure or based on the setup that we already have here right now in this API, what would be the steps that we would need to do right now to actually implement this kind of requirement? And until you might answer, I'll just grab some more drink here, because I really want you to, or I really want to get you engaged on this one. Maybe I'll just repeat a little bit. So the idea is that right now we have this kind of like API with a certain set of functionality. and then somebody comes from the business and says, we want to add a new feature. We want to be able to retrieve a list of reservations and to be able to also separately retrieve only one reservation by its ID. What would be the steps that you would have to perform as a developer to actually implement this requirement? Or let's start differently. What would be the first step that you would actually think about or that you would think to do to implement this requirement? Because this requirement seems to be very simple, but we have actually to perform things in different places and in different layers of the application. So what would be those places or the things that we would need to actually do to implement this new requirement? So I see that nobody has the courage to actually get into this discussion, unfortunately. Okay, let me just check here something first. Okay, seems that everything is okay. Okay, so in that case, I will go on, I guess, myself. Well, the way that I would start that is, first of all, in the controller, we will need some new actions for that. So I would go, okay, so Alina says from domain. Okay, but you already have the domain. Actually, in the domain, you don't have to change anything because you already have the reservation and everything. So you don't really have to make any change for that in the domain. But what you said is actually a good approach, and maybe we can extrapolate a little bit, because usually when you have to implement a new feature in this API, there are actually two approaches that you could take as a developer. And once again, I will say that none of those approaches are actually, we can say that approach 1 is actually the best and you should definitely go for that, or that the approach 2 is then the best or you should definitely go for that. It's also a matter of preference, and yeah. So those approaches would be, first of all, as Adelina said, to start from the domain. So let's see, to implement this new feature or requirement that just came out, do we actually need to do some changes in our domain layer? And you can then just take a look. Do I have everything that we need? Now, for this specific requirement, we just want to get a list of reservations or only one reservation by its ID. So we see that we already have a reservation object here, so there is no requirement that we should add something else here to those properties. Now we need to get a reservation by its ID, and we already have a property that is called reservation ID. So in this case, we can actually leave this domain layer alone because we don't need to perform any change here. So then, of course, if we follow this approach, you actually start from the inner core of your layer. So the first one would be the domain, and go then one layer by layer until you actually reach the API and the controller and you implement what you need to implement in the controller. So that is a totally fine approach. And it's actually also very, very useful. Now, the other approach that you could take, and I would say it's as okay as the other, is to actually start from the outermost layer. So you might say, okay, let me start from the controller. And while adding the functionality to the controller, because in the end, this functionality will actually leave or will be exposed to the public through this controller action. And while I work on that, I will actually also see or understand what other things I will need to add or change in all the other layers. So we could actually have these two two different approaches to the problem. So let's maybe for this one implementing this requirement of getting a list of reservations, let's go maybe for the first one. So let's start from the domain. Now, talking about the domain, we have seen that, well, we already actually have those models, and we don't actually need to change anything to the models, okay? But we also have here, for instance, some abstractions. Now, for the hotels, we also have a repository, but we don't actually need to change anything to the hotel here, because we are not performing anything on the hotel right now. So there's no need to change anything here. But if we go to this other interface, which is for the reservation service, we see that we have here only one method that is actually that make reservation method. So obviously, if we need to expose new functionality, we will probably also want to expose it through the service. So in this case, we'll just have to actually add here a task of that would return a list of reservation, and yeah, let's maybe add also the usings to that, and let's call this get all reservations. And as this will be an async method, let's also keep async as a suffix in the naming, and let's actually also change that here, because that's a best practice. If you have async methods that return tasks, you should make sure that their names have this async suffix. So that would be a very, very important part of that. Now, of course, if we have implemented or if we have changed something to the interface, already I don't know, if we go on the error list, we will have these errors that the reservation service does not implement the interface member. So we, of course, then need to come to the service and do the changes that we actually need to do here. And the first change is just add an async here to this one, because we have changed actually the name of that. So that would be the first thing to do. Then I can even make this small, and then I just need to add another method that is or that implements the new method that we have in the interface, and it would be public async, and it would be a task of list of reservation, because we will return actually all reservations here. So what is the problem here? It's only VS that is fairly slow. And how did we actually name that? Get all reservations async. So let's even not the controller, it's not this one. We're here, I guess here we are. So it should be called like that. And right now this also should go away, because we shouldn't have we should actually have implemented right now the interface. And of course, the implementation of this method would actually be very, very easy here. We could even place that in a repository, but as said also in the previous lesson, I will leave that to you to just get some practice, to also refactor the service, to use also repositories for rooms, and actually have repositories for all different resource types that we have right now. So we have rooms and reservations that don't actually have a repository right now. So, and therefore we are using directly the data context. So if you want to just have a homework, just create repositories for all the resources that we have, and then make this service actually use those repositories for data retrieval or data persistence logic. But for now, to keep things a little bit simpler and to be able to actually move forward, we'll actually use here directly the data context. So what we need to do here is very simple, just await and on the context reservations, and then to list async, because we just want to get a list of the reservations, and that should actually do that. Okay. Now, what is the problem with you? Okay, not all. Okay, because we need to return that. Of course, we need to return that. Okay. So we are good with that. So now we can move to the controller, which would be the next layer or the next outer layer to take a look where we actually need to create something. Now for the mapping, we already have a map from the reservation to a reservation get detail, so that might be just sufficient. So if we go back to the controller, first of all, in this first method, this one, we have renamed it to also contain the async suffix, and then we have to actually implement a second controller action. So let's do just this. So it would be public async task of I action result and get all reservations. Here we don't actually need any params. Now for Swagger, we also need to specify that this would be for an HTTP GET method. It would be a GET, once again, for this endpoint that we define right now as a base for this reservations resource in our API. So we don't have to specify any additional route. So what we can do here is var reservations equals wait, how did we call this, reservation service dot, here we have this get all reservations async, and that should be fine. Now the next thing that we need to do is we have to map them. Var map equals mapper map, and here we would have then to map to a list of but not member list, just list. We want to map to a list. Probably we'll need to add the using for system collections generics. Yes. So we want to map to a list of reservation get DTO, and the source for the mapping is the result that we are getting. And then we just return okay, and we return map. And more or less, I guess that should be it. So right now, if we run the application again, so let's run that. We should be able to also have an endpoint that gets us the reservations. Okay, so we have it on the other screen. Let's bring it here and just take a look at that. So we have this get, and if we try it out right now, let's execute that. And we see that we actually get here okay, but here actually we have null for the room and for the hotel, and that is because we actually need to include them, and we have seen that at a certain point, but I guess that's a good learning point to actually look again at this. So let's go here at this reservation service, but not the interface. We just need the implementation for that. And we said that in Entity Framework Core, if you want to include like hotel and room, which we call navigation properties, and we have discussed this when we have discussed about Entity Framework Core, we actually need to make sure that we include them because they are not included by default. So for each reservation, I said that I want to include the hotel, and I would also like to include not the room ID, but the room itself. And right now, just by adding actually these two includes, it means that Entity Framework will also retrieve the related properties like the hotel and the room information from the database. And if we run it once again right now, this time we should also have values for the hotel and for the room. So let's bring it to the other screen. Let's bring it here to the other screen, and if we go to reservations, we have this get, write out, execute, and we see that right now we have a bunch of reservations, and if each reservation contains the information about the room, and it also contains information about the hotel for which that reservation is made. of course, as well as the check-in date and the checkout date and the customer. So each of our reservation object looks exactly the same, more or less. Cool, so we are good with that. Now, the second part of the requirement was actually that we should also be able to retrieve a reservation by ID. So in this case, let's take the other approach when we start from the most outer layer. And that most outer layer would be, in our case, the controller. So the first thing that we will look into would be, for instance, public async task of action result, and here get reservation. And to actually make it a little bit more interesting, let's not get the reservation by its ID, or I don't know. Oh, okay, let's get it by ID. So get reservation by ID. So what should we, or what do we need to do here? So if we need to go here, first of all, that would be an HTTP get. So we need to specify that, because we just want to actually get something from our API. We just want to get information about the resource, but we don't want to change anything. So nothing will be modified. Now, the only thing that we need here is also we need the ID. And how did we actually get by ID? And I guess we worked with that fairly a lot when we implemented the hotels controller and with all its nested resources. And if you were maybe not present and wonder what actually those nested resources are, there is a lesson that is actually only dedicated to this concept of nested resources. But the idea is that what we'll need here instead, we'll have to also further specify the route with a reservation ID that we will have to actually read from the URL. And as we discussed that when we did implement the hotels controller, ASP.NET Core can automatically actually map us this type of routing parameters, reservation ID, if they are actually the same. So let me just maybe copy this to make sure that I don't have any typo or something like that. And okay, I guess from the controller action perspective, I would be good to go right now. So what would I need to do in the controller to actually get a reservation by ID? Well, I probably would need to actually use this reservation service to get that reservation by ID. Now, of course, I can't really do that because that service is lacking a method that actually can do that. So, of course, now I realize that, okay, in order to implement kind of like this requirement, I have to extend the functionality. So I will go here in this reservation interface and just extend its functionality. And I will have a task of reservation, because it will be only one in this time, get reservation by ID. And here we will also need an int ID for that. Okay, cool. But once again, also the async suffix, because it's an async method, it returns a task. So we have done, we have added this functionality actually to the interface. Now, of course, the next step is, because we even have some errors because of this, we just need to also implement this method in our service. So we would come here and say public async task of reservation get reservation by ID async, and we need to actually get in here an int ID, so we can then implement this method right now. Let me just check that it's actually the same naming as we have here in the interface, because I tend to actually do a lot of typos. So let's maybe just make sure that we copy exactly what we have there, and we would be fine. Here what we need to do, once again, it's not a big deal. Once again, you could even here use just a repository for that, and I strongly encourage you to maybe find some time, clone this this application, and from GitHub, of course, and implement then repositories, or implement this functionality actually in a repository where it would actually belong. And that would help you also practice the concepts that we have discussed during this course. So what we'll do here instead is we will have, actually we can just also return await, and we'll just use the context here, reservations. Now here, as we have done before, let's go on a different line. We want to include the hotel. So for each reservation, or for the reservation, I want Entity Framework Core to also include me the hotel object that this reservation actually belongs to. Then I would also like to include, here I will have once again R, and I would like to include the room object to which this reservation refers to. And then what I would like to do is say first or default async. And of course here I can specify the condition that I want. And once again, for the reservation, I want to look for a reservation for which the reservation ID equals to the ID that we have received as an incoming parameter to this method. And that is actually all that this method should do right now, because it just gets us a reservation from the database. So we should be good to go with that. Therefore, let's go back to this reservation controller and implement the logic here. Var reservation equals await reservation service dot get reservation by ID async. So that's the one that we want to get, and we have this reservation ID that we need to specify here as an incoming param to the method. So this should be fine. Then we need to map this. So var map equals mapper.map. So we want to map this to reservation get DTO. Okay, and the source for that would be the reservation that we get from the database. Okay. And as we have done here, for instance, if reservation, actually we can put this if even before we do the mapping, so that we don't run code that's actually not necessary. So here if, and that's also something that we already have done in the hotels controller. So if reservation equals null, then we can just return a not found result. Maybe you can specify a text, no reservation found for the ID, and let's maybe use string interpolation here, this, and we then specify the reservation ID that we received here as a param. So if we don't find a reservation, we just return a not found. Otherwise, we do the mapping, and after we do the mapping, but I'm curious, why do we actually have an error here? Not sure. I guess we are having a problem with the parentheses here. Where does this parentheses actually belong? It doesn't belong actually anywhere. Or? No, it doesn't. Cool. So now the only thing that we need to do after we map is to return OK, and we return the mapped result, and we should be okay right now. So let's try to run this in our API. Let's run our application and let's try that out. Okay, what happened here? What really happened here? Do we have an error here? No, we don't. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Let's try to run it again. Okay, it's still on the other screen. Yeah, now it's working. I really don't know what happened the other time around. And right now, if we go here, we see that we have this API reservations and we have this reservation ID. And I'm not sure about the ID, but I guess we have a reservation with ID 1. So I guess we can simply go and get that. Okay, and it returned me the reservation, including the hotel and the room. And let's try a reservation with ID 15. We probably don't have a reservation with that ID. And here in this case, we got this 404, no reservation found for the ID 15, which is expected. That's actually what we wanted to achieve. So also this endpoint is right now okay, it's implemented, and we managed to implement all the required functionality. Now, there is one other thing that somebody might ask from us. They would say, okay, so we can get a reservation by ID, we can even get a list of different reservations, but I want to be able to cancel a reservation that I have already done. Now, right now, what we will implement in our application for this idea, if you cancel a reservation, we will just delete that from the database. So we also need to implement that one. Now, once again, when we want to delete a reservation, there's really no need to actually change anything in the domain model itself, or to the reservation, or to the room, or to the hotel. But we will have to actually once again here extend the functionality of our interface of our reservation service. So I would have here a task of, let's maybe also return the reservation that we just deleted, so that the consumer might be able to just take a look at that and know exactly what reservation was deleted. And let's call this delete reservation async. Okay, and of course what we'll need here is also an ID to know exactly, okay, which reservation is that we need to delete. So we have implemented this change in the interface, we have extended that with functionality. So of course then we'll have to do this in our service, because otherwise we have, however, an error, because right now our service doesn't implement interface since it doesn't have an implementation for this last method that we have added. So let's just do that. Public async task of reservation, and we'll call this let's call this cancel. Cancel reservation, and int ID cancel reservation async. Okay, and of course here we just need to provide implementation. Now here what we can do is first of all we need to retrieve the reservation equals await context dot reservations first or default async, and we want the only condition that the reservation ID will be equal to the ID that we just received as an incoming param to this one. Now of course here what we can do is well, simply try to do something like that. So if reservation not equals null, okay, so if reservation not equals null, then what we want to do here is context dot reservations dot remove, and we just want to remove the reservation from there. So that is what we do here if it is not null, because if it is null, we can delete that. So we can't actually remove that reservation from the database. Still, however, in the end, we can just save the changes, because if we don't do this, well, we will run save changes, but there will actually there won't be any pending change on that. So that will not cause any problem. So await context dot save changes async. So that would do it, and then we return the reservation. So that is what our service does right now. We still get an error. I'm not sure exactly why. Okay. Cancel reservation async. I guess it's something like because the naming. Maybe I call this delete reservation async. Okay, no problem. Let's just fix that. But not the controller. I want the service, and here the service. This is not cancel, but it is delete. And right now all the errors are gone, so no problem anymore. Cool. So our application is looking better and better right now. It has already quite a bit of functionality. Okay, so then if we have implemented this service, like the last step that we need to do here is we need to go back to the controller, of course. Where is it? Not this is the mapping profile. That doesn't really help. In the controller, we need to implement this functionality. So it would be another controller action, public async task of, I don't know, maybe we just want to return the reservation that was deleted. But no, it's task of action result. And what we'll do is actually we'll take a look about how we did handle this in our other controller. So to be consistent, because I guess I remember that if I guess for delete and update, we just return something like no content, like it would be a 204. So that would indicate that the operation was successful, but there is actually no content to be returned. So if task.iActionResult, let's call it cancel reservation. Now here we would also need the int reservation ID, and of course we'll get that from the routing. First of all, let's specify that this controller action is for the HTTP delete method, and it is for the route that contains actually here this reservation ID. Actually, I'm a little bit, it's strange that it actually worked here, because theoretically you should provide this in this form here. So that's the syntax that we should actually use. Cool. So we have this reservation ID. So what we'll do here in this case, very simple. So var deleted equals await reservation service dot, guess we have called it delete reservation ID. Okay, so we are good with that. Now let's take a look at sed at the other controller and let's check what we do. So if it is null, that we return not found. Okay, but let's go for to the update or to the delete, because that's exact the same scenario. So if it is null, then we actually return not found. Otherwise, we return no content. So we will be consistent with this. So we will do it like this. So if deleted equals null, what we'll do here is we will just return not a bad request, but what did we return there? Not found, of course. Oh my god, because we didn't find the reservation, so we can't really delete that. But otherwise, we can just simply return no content. Cool. So we have also implemented kind of like this functionality. So as we have done already for all the steps that we have taken here today for all these new requirements, let's check it out if it works in our Swagger. So let's get that started. Okay. So if we go to reservations, we see that we have this endpoint right out. We know already that we have a reservation with ID 1 because we have tried it out with that get by ID. Get by ID. So let's run it out, and we have received this 204 no content. So it means that it was deleted successfully. And actually, we can even test that because let's get all the reservations. So execute, and we see that okay, we don't have any reservation with ID 1. We have with 2, we have with 3, 4, and then 5 and 6. And then we already jumped to 1002 and so on and so forth. So that means that our reservation was actually deleted. So that's okay. Now let's try to delete a reservation for which, or that we know it doesn't really exist, like a reservation for the ID 15. So let's execute that. And we already returned a 404 not found because we were not able to find any resource like that. So cool, that actually means that we are covered and everything is okay. So yeah, that's mostly the functionality that we wanted to add today to our reservations controller and to our reservations in general. If you have any questions, then please don't be shy and just write them here in the chat. I would really try to, of course, answer them. Okay. So what actually do we need to do next? I said that there is one other thing that I would like to cover in today's lesson, and that one is actually model validation. Because what happens here, and for this I'll go over to this hotels controller just for a while, because what happens here is if we get here, and when we talk about model validation, that's something that we need to do whenever we have post and put requests, because in those requests we actually receive a body from the consumer, and we have to make sure that certain requirements of the information in that body are okay to be processed, because it really could be, for instance, that they would not be okay. And first of all, that would mean that if we go to the DTO, we need actually a way to specify actually what are some conditions for a hotel create DTO that is valid. And we can define such conditions actually on each property that we have in this class. And the way we do that is using some attributes that are especially made for that. And they are in the namespace that is called, I guess, system component model data annotations. So we can say here for the name, for instance, that it is required. So it means that whenever a client makes a request, it is required that they provide a name here. Otherwise, that request shouldn't even actually go to the service or to the repository. We should instantly actually return a bad request, because if you want to create a resource, then I have this condition, then the name should be required. But actually also more than that, we can even add further such attributes that are specifically designed to once again define exactly what is valid, what is acceptable and not. We can say here, for instance, that we have, for instance, the string length. Yeah, we can specify the string length, and that would be actually the maximum length of the string that we actually accept. And I don't know, let's say we just accept only a maximum of 50 characters for a name. Now that means that if you want to create a name property that has more than 50 characters, that is not acceptable for our applications. Right now, the way that you actually do this, or what exact validations you want to put here, it really depends on your business use cases, what is actually required. Right now, we just want to go through this to make up or to make ourselves an idea about what we can achieve with that. But not even this, we also want for the string to have a min length. And the minimum length, I would say, for a name, I don't know, should be 2 characters. So if somebody tries to actually create a new hotel that has only, I don't know, 1 character, this for sure not a valid hotel. And let's maybe extend this to, I don't know, to 2 is okay. I don't know, maybe you have a hotel called Oz or something like that. So that would be acceptable, I guess. Then for stars, once again, we need to say that, for instance, this property here is required. So we mark it with this required attribute. And for instance, we can even say, I guess it's the range attribute, and we can provide here a range that we want from 1 actually to what would be a 5, minimum or maximum. Okay, so minimum will be 1 and maximum would be 5. So in this case, we specify, as you see here, that we actually specify a certain range. So when you specify a number for the stars, it cannot be less than 1 and it cannot be greater than 5. So that's actually why we actually do this. So here we learned another such attribute that we can use for this validation, which is this range. Now for the address, let's keep it maybe here simple. Let's say here that this is required. We won't add any other attribute. Also the city is required and the country, because we want to know exactly where that hotel is located, because otherwise customers can't really make reservations if they don't know where actually that hotel is. So let's put this also all required. But description, if the hotel doesn't want to provide a description, well, it's their problem. We don't really care about that. So description is not required, or you can do here whatever you want. By the way, shout out Adelina for your sticker. Thank you very much. It's actually a very, very nice one and motivating one for me. Keep it up. Thank you very much. I will do that. I will definitely do that. Thank you very, very much. Cool. So right now, once again, when we talk about this idea of model validation, the first thing, as said, we need to actually define what's actually valid and not. And this is what we have done here just by specifying here these attributes. And the cool thing about ASP.NET Core is that actually it will already, when somebody tries to make a call right now to our API, only due to the fact that we have actually decorated our properties with these attributes, ASP.NET Core will already try to check if those properties or these incoming properties are valid according to the criteria that we have defined here. And once again, that's very cool because we don't really have to do anything for that. We just need to actually define the conditions using different type of attributes that we have here. And ASP.NET Core will do the rest for us. So we don't really need to do anything else. However, what we can do is instead, if we come back here to our hotels controller, and in this create hotel, now what can we do actually here is, but you know what? Let us already first run the application, because I really want to show you something here. I really want to show you something here. Okay, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with this one? Why does it sometimes throw this not found? I guess it doesn't really start correctly. I don't know, still not found. Okay, let's run it again. Just simply run it again. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening here, because actually we haven't changed anything in the functionality itself. Let's maybe just clean the solution first to make sure that we don't have any, I don't know, problems here remaining. Let's also rebuild that. Even though when we run this, also a rebuild is triggered. I don't know, maybe when I move the window from one screen to the other, I don't know, maybe Google Chrome does something wrong with that. So let's try that again. So we try to open it and it starts on the other monitor, and yeah, right now it has opened correctly. So let's start here. We are on the hotel and we have created for this post. So we have created all these criteria here. So first for the name, we have said it should be at least 2 characters. So let's make it 1. Stars, we have said that it's a range from, I don't know, 1 to 5. Let's make it 6. address, city, country, we all said that they are required. So you know what, just remove them. And also the description. Okay, and let's now try to execute the request. And you see what happens already? So we just have actually decorated our DTO with all the requirements for what actually a valid DTO is. And ASP.NET Core already, if somebody tried to actually make a request with invalid data, it did already catch this. And it says that, okay, the city field is required. Then for the name field must be a string or array type with a minimum length of 2. And we have provided 1. Now for the stars, the field stars was or must be between 1 and 5. Ours was 6. Then address. The address field is required or not. For the country, once again, the country is required or not. So once again, only by the fact that we have actually decorated that DTO with attributes that kind of like specify what actually a valid hotel create DTO is, ASP.NET Core already does this validation for us. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, it actually just returns this response just right away. Which is a 400 response, like a bad request. So we don't even have to care about that. We know that Entity Framework Core will already do this out of the box. However, there is one other thing that I wanted to show you, because there are some cases, for instance, where even in our own logic, for instance, if, I don't know, the model is not valid, we actually want to do something, or if by any reason we actually need to actually get some information about the model state in our controller action, we can do that very easily, because not only ASP.NET Core does actually validate for us that the model that the clients actually send in the body is correct or not, or is valid or not. It is also providing us with this specific information. Like for instance, we can say something like, I don't know, here model state, if model state. Now this model state is a property on the controller itself, so that's why we can simply use that. So we can say here, for instance, if model state is valid, then we want to do something. If the model state is valid, then we want to do something. But okay, what did I do here? Okay, so once again, remember, I just wanted you to show this only because, well, practically the only thing that we need to do to have model validation in our API is just decorating our DTO here with the specific attributes here that kind of like define what a valid hotel create DTO is. ASP.NET Core does the rest for us, and not only that it does the validation, but in the controller, if we need for any reason to look into what actually ASP.NET Core has done regarding the model validation, we can just simply use this model state, which is provided by default, so you don't have to declare it anywhere, you can just use that. It's already a property here on the base controller that we inherit, so you can actually just use that directly. And let's maybe put a breakpoint here, and let's run the application once again and try to create a new resource. And we have already seen that if we use invalid or incorrect data, it will actually already fail. So it will not even get to our controller at all. So we have to make sure that we create some valid data, because I want us to just take it very easy and look into what exactly that model state actually contains. So we have a post, but not for reservations. We are for the hotels. So we want to post, so to create a new hotel. Now the name should be between 3 and 50, which it is. Stars, let's make it 2, so it is within the range. Some address, we need to provide a city. We need to provide a country. because that is required. And the description is not required, so we can even skip that if we don't want to provide it. So let's execute the request now, and we see that we have actually entered here this breakpoint. And let's take a look here. If I hover the mouse, we see here IntelliSense telling us that this is a model state, and if we expand that, we can see that we have here an error count. And right now this is set to 0 because we don't have any errors. Then we have here different other type of properties like the keys, which actually represent in the result view that's actually empty. I don't know exactly why, but it will actually contain the keys or the names of all the properties that we actually want to validate. It will contain the values that needs to be validated, and this validation state and is valid, which is actually the property that is used the most. So this is actually what you get to see in this model state. So once again, you can use this property directly if you need in your controller to perform any type of validation, or not validation, but any type of logic based on whether this model state is valid or not, or the keys, or what errors you might have. So that's really depending on each scenario. There is no common rule for that. The common rule is that we should have model validation, and the easy way and the fastest way to actually do that is in ASP.NET Core. Well, just use those attributes and then everything will be done for you by ASP.NET Core, so you don't have to take care about that anymore. Okay, and I guess that would actually do it for today. So as said, once again, I'm not sure if you that are watching here right now are or were here already when we started, but next Monday we will actually have our last lesson. Even though right now, but okay, no, on Monday it's okay. So next Monday there will be the last lesson here in this series, because we have really covered all the basics, all the fundamentals regarding an ASP.NET Core API. And as said also at the beginning, at least for the company that I work for and for which I'm doing interviews, if you come to an interview and well, at least on the ASP.NET Core part, you know all the stuff that we have covered during this course, then your junior software developer position will be secured. Of course, to that you would probably have to add also some theoretical background on, I don't know, basic object-oriented principles, solid principles like C# things, like try catches, exception handling, and things like that are not really related to ASP.NET Core but to C# directly. But from an ASP.NET Core perspective, if you know all the things that we have covered during this course, that would be really sufficient for entering actually a junior position. And what we'll do next Monday is actually a recap, a summary of the entire application. So we look once again into this project structure. We will try to summarize once again what actually do we have in each project and what belongs to each project or each layer of our application. We will then go through all of our ASP.NET Core stuff and once again have a brief summary on services, middleware, controllers, how they work, how routing is done, and things similar to that. And one other thing that will, I hope, this requires, of course, also your collaboration, is that I would like to have a Q&A session. So please prepare questions for next Monday. So if you have any type of question on things that are not clear enough from what we have done so far, please note those questions and bring them up during next Monday's lesson, because I really want to spend the time needed to clarify all these type of aspects, because when we finish this series, I really want you to have everything as clear as possible in your head. And that's why it would be a very good opportunity for you to actually bring up or come up with your questions that might still arise after all the things that we have done so far. But yeah, this being said, I guess that's pretty much for it for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for getting engaged. Thank you very much, Adelina. Shout out once again for your sticker. That actually motivates me a lot to keep it up. Thank you very much. And take care, stay safe, and hope to see you here next Monday, and hope to get also your questions during the Q&A session. So take care, bye.